The heart is often described as a double pump. This is 5.2. Describe why. This is because blood is travelling twice through the heart. One time to the body from the left-hand side, and in the second time to the lungs, which is through the right-hand side. If you've got those the other way around, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's 1 mark. Now, this was quite a tricky evaluation question. So, question 5.3. In coronary heart disease, layers of fatty material build up inside the coronary arteries. This can cause a heart attack. Statins and stents can be used to reduce the risk of heart attack in people with CHD. Evaluate the use of statins and stents in people with CHD. And it says, remember to include a justified conclusion. Now, this is one of those levelled answers. Okay, with an evaluate question, you've got to give pros and cons, and because it's asked you to conclude, in order to get up to that high level, you have to do that. And for both statins and stents, you have to evaluate them both, and then you have to conclude to get up into that higher one. If you'd have just taken on one method, for example, just stents, evaluated pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages, and concluded, you could still get into that middle bracket, which is about 4 marks out of 6. Okay, and I would imagine that most people would do that. To get into level 1, perhaps you had some info as to why statins or stents were good, but not really of any value, so that would be 1 or 2 marks. Okay. Now, the way that I like to lay these out is make it really clear. So these are my pros or my advantages. These are my cons or my disadvantages. And because we've got 2 things, I had to do it twice. So, pros of stents. We've done stents, haven't we? Blocked arteries are held open, blood flow is improved, they last a long time, you have relatively quick recovery. Cons or disadvantages of stents: there is a risk of an infection from the procedure, there's a risk from the surgery, there's a risk of a blood clot. Conclusion. Now, a justified conclusion can look very simple. So all I would do for a justified conclusion is say, overall, I think the benefits of stents allowing blood flow to be improved outweigh the risks that are presented by it. So that's, you've got a balanced conclusion then, because you've mentioned both. So 1 sentence. Statins we haven't talked about before. Statins are drugs that lower blood cholesterol. Okay, so their advantages are they decrease cholesterol, they slow down the build-up of fatty material, and they improve blood flow. However, you've got to take the drug regularly for it to work. It's taken over a long time. There are side effects, as in with any drug, and it takes time to work. So again, your conclusion would be justified. Overall, I think the benefits of decreasing blood cholesterol outweigh the risks given. Okay, so again, for that level 3, you were looking for both methods evaluated. Level 2, 1 method evaluated. Okay, question 6. In 2014, there was an outbreak of Ebola in Africa. At the time of the outbreak, there were no drugs available, no vaccines. By March 2015, there was an estimated 9,850 deaths worldwide from EVD. The number of deaths is an estimate. Suggest why it is an estimate. Not all deaths are or were recorded. Not all deaths or causes of deaths were recorded. Sometimes you just don't know why people died. Why were antibiotics not used to treat this? It is a virus, and antibiotics do not destroy viruses. After the outbreak began, drug companies started to develop drugs and vaccines for EVD. A drug has to be thoroughly tested in trial before it's licensed. Testing, trialling and licensing new drugs usually takes several years. Draw one line from each word about the drug testing to the definition of the word. So dose is the concentration of the drug. Toxicity is any side effects that it may have. Efficacy is whether the drug works to cure the illness. The results of the drug testing and drug trials are studied in detail by other scientists. Only then can the results be published by the drug company. Suggest one reason why the results are studied by other scientists. To prevent false claims, that could be one mark. To avoid bias, to ensure conclusions are correct. The number of deaths from EVD continued to increase. The World Health Organization decided it was ethical to use unlicensed drugs. The WHO said unlicensed drugs could only be given to people who gave their permission. Also, any results had to be shared with other researchers and drug companies. Some vaccines had shown positive results in animal testing, but the vaccines had not been tested and trialled in humans. The supplies of the vaccines were low. At first, the vaccines were only used for health workers. How would the use of the vaccine reduce the spread of the EVD? So, like with any vaccine, some people would be immune to EVD, so there is less chance of it being passed on because they're not carrying that virus. And here we have another evaluate question. Okay, evaluate the use of unlicensed drugs and vaccines during the EVD outbreak. Give a balanced and justified conclusion. So just like before, okay, you're looking at splitting the evaluation up into two. Why did they use those unlicensed drugs? What was the benefit of that? What could have some of the disadvantages been? And then again, your conclusion. Up in that level 3, I was looking for roughly 3 arguments for and against in each category, and then also your conclusion. In level 2, you could have done a number of different things. You could have had 2 arguments for and against in each side, or all of them but just really unstructured, or just no conclusion. I would have put you down to level 2. Okay, so any of those pros you might have. Obviously, it could have saved lives. It could reduce the chance of future outbreak of disease. The patient may have agreed to using the drug and therefore it was completely acceptable. They may have shared the results with other people, and that would have sped up the development of that drug. And it was obviously good for those health workers to protect their lives because they were going into vulnerable situations. So let's say 3 arguments from there. 3 arguments from the disadvantages side. Perhaps they were dangerous. They could harm healthy people. It actually goes against the law, which governs drug development, which basically means that you're not really meant to do that with untrialed drugs. It might set a precedent for other drugs. So, for example, people might not trial other more unsafe drugs. And why is it fair for the health workers to use it if the Africans aren't able to use it? So my justified conclusion might be, overall, I think the number of lives saved by using this drug totally outweighed the risks presented by the use of the drug. Okay, a justified, balanced conclusion.